think about it this way. Taiwan knows that the last thing they want to do is go down the route that Ukraine went down. They'll lose everything and they'll be destroyed as a nation because the U.S. won't stand up for them and won't save them. And they know that in their hearts.
This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius. Germanicus is here. We're in Londinium. It's come fall in Londinium. The Thames is turbulent. It's cool in the evening. Our second cup of wine warms us. We'll go to the theater later. The centurions have shopped with their families. All is well in the kingdom by the river. We're very far from Rome and secure, as you know. That's important to us because we're equus class, meaning we're not as rich as senators, but we do have something to worry about, which is the Greeks work for us. And that means everybody knows everything about our wealth. At the same time, we like to speculate about politics. It is not safe to talk about the politics of Rome, even to talk. We certainly don't write anything down. We found, however, we can talk about the politics of the 21st century and not get in trouble. It's a gift. We can also talk about the intervening 21 centuries and not get in trouble. So here we go, paying attention to the 21st century on the basis of our education in the 1st century AD. Augustus is our god. We thank him for the success of the Julian-Claudian reign, and Vespasian and his two sons, Domitian is now the second son in charge, have not filled in the gap. There will be a success ahead of us, not just Nerva, but Trajan and Hadrian, and the 2nd century will go well. We're keen on, however, what's going on in the 21st century. Within these last hours, the richest man in the solar system in the 21st century, a young man named Musk, bunny hopped on the stage for the new Gracchus brother, as Germanicus has identified, Donald Trump. Bunny hopped, the richest man in the solar system, bunny hopping to get the crowd cheering. And nothing was more obvious to me as I watched that bunny hop than Germanicus had it right. What upsets the elite, what upsets them more than anything else, that would be the senatorial class, is that one of their own is betraying them. That is, Trump, who is in the role of the Gracchus brother, has gone over to the plebes. And here comes Musk, another billionaire plebe, bunny hopping across, backing Trump. So now once the Senate class disposes of Trump is the plan, they'll turn on Musk. However, Germanicus, a very good evening to you. I've been pondering your recognition of Trump. I couldn't find what emperor he was, and he's not an emperor. He's one of the Gracchus brothers. He's the young Gracchus. His older two brothers were murdered by the mob because they came up with land reform, which of course appalls the senatorial class. Now Musk is out there bunny hopping. How does the Senate see Musk betraying them? Good evening to you.
Good evening, Gaius. The betrayal is a betrayal in class. And the class vision in America has historically, in the last, century or more, crept up on us. It certainly wasn't part of the original American society, where the wealthiest American, Alexander Hamilton, had today the equivalent back in the 18th century of maybe $1 billion. Now we have a situation which emerged in the Gilded Age through the 1920s until today, and now it's completely out of control, where you have mega billionaires, and most of them are front and center aligned indissolubly with the establishment of blue, because that is the establishment of wealth. Blue is the optimates. It is the ruling aristocracy. In fact, it is an aristocracy represented by a clutch or gaggle of oligarchs, all billionaires, and they run politics and the country. So to see a man who would, in some ways, risk everything by rebelling and joining with Mr. Trump, who's also a very rich man, suggests an interesting dynamic that we can see in our own recent times at the end of the Roman Republic, in which the men who championed the populares, the people, were in fact among the richest Romans. And Caesar, of course, is the beau ideal of that. And in fact, one of the ways in which Trump has solidified his incredible ties with the people is in large to a large degree a result of his wealth, which of course isn't really that great, but if people feel he cannot be bought and that he is a model to them and that he has wedded or made his fate their fate, and they understand that commitment, which is complete. And in the last several months, this is what Mr. Musk has done. And it is this embrace of the people that absolves you of what would otherwise be the encumbrance of your wealth, because you are committing yourself as a powerful person to the people. And that means that your wealth then is being committed to their side. It's a kind of, in a war, if you could get an ally who had lots of weapons and lots of divisions, that would be welcome. And it's the same sort of thing to see Mr. Musk embrace the Trump campaign. And so you see a kind of powerful surge there. And it is important for the populares in America, the vast majority of Americans who feel betrayed by their government, by their establishment, and by the ruling class and its oligarchy. It's extremely important when you have these emotional defections in which people like Mr. Trump or Mr. Musk essentially throw everything overboard because, listen, once they've committed, they're dead to the establishment. And so that, in many ways, the establishment rejection of Mr. Trump and of Mr. Musk actually helped to cement and solidify the complete adulation and embrace of the people.
What does it mean that Musk is Mars? What does it mean that Musk is the planet transformed? What does it mean that Musk keeps inventing himself? What does that mean in terms of this contest with the Senate?
It's very important. It's important in a kind of metaphorical, hyper spiritual way, because the America that the vast majority of Americans embrace is an America that is all about a frontier.
Yeah.
They all remember Kennedy's promise to put a man on the moon. America in the world that their fathers and grandfathers embraced was a world in which America would transcend and take humanity to a new place, not by conquest, not by wars, but by heading into space. And it's the whole Star Trek vision and the original Star Trek. And this is supremely powerful calling to Americans, and Americans, frankly, of all ages. And Musk has brought this to Trump, whereas what blue represents is the failed NASA and the FAA and all of these regulatory agencies that can't do squat and only end up bringing everything down to the level of absolute inefficiency and
Let's
grinding.
let's talk about Cleopatra. Cleopatra is doing very well on the campaign trail until she just hit a Musk turn on the road. Does she have an answer?
She, unlike the actual Cleopatra that we know, from Tacitus and Suetonius,
It's suicide.
this Cleopatra is a, I don't know. I mean, she is
She's
a fleeting image.
she's the Senate. That's what she is.
She is the Senate. She's transparently the Senate.
Right.
In a recent speech, when her teleprompter went down, she could do nothing but repeat, "We have 32 days. We have
Right.
30."
She was appointed by the Senate. Biden is the Senate. He appointed
Yes.
the president. And when he decided to back away because the senators on his side told him, drop it, you're not going to beat Musk. Remember?
Well,
You're
let me put it this.
You're
Yeah,
not
the
going to
Biden,
beat Musk and Biden. You're not going to beat them. So the Senate dropped out, choosing the Senate again. So
right.
Kamala Harris is the Senate. Does she have an answer to Mars?
Uh, let's just take a little simile here. And Biden is comparable to Quintilius Varus. He is a man who did everything right, got into a position, rose to the height of his incapacity, and practically destroyed, well, he did destroy the Roman enterprise in Germany. And I think that Kamala Harris is the same sort of person. It She is not important. What's important is that the world that put her where she is an oligarchy, and therefore Kamala Harris represents
Right.
all of the weaknesses of an oligarchy in that they cannot let a major leader take over, and they are happy to put up paper mache figures. And that is their downfall. I mean, you can see this in oligarchies everywhere in history, including our own, not just Venice, but you can look at oligarchies in Athens I mean, this is the incredible weakness of blue right now.
One more short question about Cleopatra. Harris. Does Cleopatra have the ability to do war drums? Because we're about to go to war. We're at war. We're going to more war. Can she answer in the next 30 days where we know there's going to be major league violence? Can she answer that?
Yes, with whatever she's told to say. I mean, she cannot.
What will they tell her to say? I agree with Joe?
Well, what she will be told to say is essentially a lineal continuity with everything that has been said from the Biden administration, which is in effect the inner circle of the Biden administration, and it will be war.
So she will repeat what the Senate says. All right. And no answer to Musk. We're going to war. I'm speaking to Germanicus, and we're avoiding the dangers of the first century AD by talking about the 21st century. And the word got around town that Germanicus and I have been talking about the 21st century, and our colleagues and neighbors are puzzled why we're doing this. We're doing this because it's fun, and also because it is surprising always to discover Rome popping up in America. It's you turn over a rock and there's some version of Rome. I don't know whether this is because there are only so many endings or because we're going somewhere that Rome didn't get. The war between Jerusalem and Tehran. This has been building for many, many years. And the U.S. is now watching, Russia's watching, Beijing's watching, all the powers are watching. What happens next, we don't know. But we do know that what we've got here is an opportunity for what in a video game would be called the final battle. You make your way through all the levels of the game and you come to the big boss. And you better be equipped. You better have the right armor, the right tools, the right moves. I've seen children play this. And the real world, Israel has all the right tools, and Tehran is either acting a martyr to its cause or has a trick we don't know about. I can't tell. Germanicus, what I'm interested in your response is, in the Roman Empire, in our empire, we like final battles. We like it when the enemy gives battle, and it's very frustrating when they do not. One, do you believe Tehran will give battle because Israel's ready? And two, does this in any fashion tell us about the direction that the Eurasian wars are moving? The war in Ukraine, the war in Hamas, the war in Hezbollah, the war with Tehran, the war with the Houthis, the war in East Asia between Taiwan and Beijing. Can we learn anything from this final battle, which of course is never the final battle?
This is an American confection, like a video game. To call it a final battle is merely to trumpet the fact that the U.S. is trying to make it into a kind of marquee event, a final battle, and Israel, of course, as well. And if we were to look at what is going on from larger dynamics, it would be most comparable to the Third Reich's invasion of Soviet Russia in June of 1941, in the sense that Herr Hitler said to all of his generals, based on, pretty good information from like the war with Finland, et cetera, that all you had to do is kick down the door. This was a rotten structure. Everyone hated Stalin. You just had to kick down the door and it would be over. Americans, especially neocon American provocateurs, have been saying that for the last 30 years and more. And yet, Iran now, like the Soviet Union in 1941, is not alone. I mean, if the Wehrmacht had been able to ride roughshod over the Soviet Union without any American aid, they would certainly have won. But the U.S. had a huge pipeline, actually 3 pipelines into Soviet Russia with Lend-Lease, and that made all the difference. Now you have China and Russia in support of Iran. And then Iran, of course, is not simply a single place. It's also a kind of a constellation of the Shia world, including the Houthi, the Syrians, all of the Shia in Iraq. That's a big deal. And of course, the Sunni are afraid of the Shia because 2 centuries ago, the Shia were not much outside of Iran, but now they've spread in many ways. And Hezbollah's success in Lebanon, the Houthis' success, et cetera, has created a situation that is not amenable or accessible to force majeure. Force majeure means main force, we will destroy you. I do not think Israel can do that, even if it's fully backed up by the United States. It is it's a tar baby, a briar patch. It's a situation where the U.S. could go down if it allows Israel to get sucked into, well, not sucked into, initiating and prosecuting a direct war against Iran.
There's not just one war here, Germanicus. I want you to help us understand there are 2 or 3 wars going on now, and this would be an additional war. Yes. The others don't stop because this one starts.
Right, and the U.S. has been suckered into wars in Ukraine, although the U.S. helped set up that war, and also now in the Middle East. And these wars have been draining the U.S. And I don't mean draining the U.S. in a kind of rhetorical sense. It's been draining the U.S. of all of its stocks of military ordnance, weapons. We're not in a position to fight a war. And frankly, in the Far East, China has to do nothing. All it has to do is to support Russia and to an extent Iran, and they will bleed us out. And
The
Israel,
suggestion you're making is that it's not the final battle, but that the U.S. is now in a position of weakness, not strength.
yeah, and well, okay, let's put two and two together. The U.S. is already in a position of weakness
Right.
because it entered into this proxy war against Russia, and it is now bleeding out, at least in terms of military capability. It is in no position to truly support Israel, and Israel will continue the bleeding so that the U.S. will be in a position where it is potentially fatally weakened.
And,
And this war will go on for years.
and East Asia also. The rhetoric, the rhetoric is backed up by provocation after provocation in the South China Sea, threats to
Okay.
threats to our allies, the Philippines, threats to our allies, Japan, threats to Australia, threats in all directions. That also is happening. Uh,
Yes, of course. But I mean, what China is doing is showboating. Its provocations against the Philippines are kind of just a softening up. And Australia is toothless, truly. It won't have any capability until it has American uh, infused nuclear submarines, and that won't be for another 20 years because the entire defense industrial base of Australia is a joke.
so,
And the
so
only true naval power in the
the
Far East is Japan. And
next moves are all written down then. We're not looking at a decision point. The decisions
no,
are
well, what's going to happen is that our failure in Ukraine
right.
and whatever is going to be unleashed in the Middle East is only making China's leverage with Taiwan more powerful. Because think about it this way: Taiwan knows that the last thing they want to do is go down the route that Ukraine went down. They'll lose everything and they'll be destroyed as a nation because the US won't stand up for them and won't save them. And they know that in their hearts. And so what they want to do is maintain enough of a strong attitude that they can negotiate with China eventually when China makes them an offer they can't refuse. But
So
in a sense, what I'm saying, let's put it plainly, the US has queered the deal with Taiwan. We've destroyed any hope that Taiwan will resist because they don't want to be destroyed.
you can't find an ending to this then. That's what I'm not going to ask you for resolution. I'm just going to say we're into great power competition and
We're
these
losing.
these
Yeah.
wars will not be final.
No, we're losing. And we need to, when you're losing, the most important thing to do, whether you're a great power or small power, the most important thing you need to do is say, how do we stop losing? Because once you change the terms of your situation and stop losing, then you can start thinking about either winning, if that's still possible, or coming up with a better outcome in the end.
I'm Gaius, Germanicus is here, and we're having a good conversation about no endings, just great power competition, which is something Rome didn't have to master because Carthago delenda est, the only rival we thought we had, we salted the wells. However, the Parthians were annoying at the edge. Right now, we're talking about the 21st century and choices. The Roman way of war was Trajan and Hadrian. They understood it. You didn't negotiate with your enemy. You destroyed it the way they destroyed Dacia. They destroyed it so completely that for centuries of archaeology, 2 or 3 centuries, they thought the capital city was in fact one that the Romans built afterwards to make sure that the Dacians didn't rebuild Sarmagus Regia in the Carpathian Mountains. Transylvania, that's where the Dacians live. However, that's the Roman way of war. And there is an alternative. And the question is, which way is the U.S. going? Germanicus, I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure, so I'll phrase it this way. We have the Roman way of war, which is the might of Rome, and the enemy must be destroyed. Carthage must be destroyed forever. Just ruins, even hard to find ruins 2,000 years later. Or there is the alternative, which is to pay them and negotiate and call it diplomacy. That's a choice that the U.S. has not made routinely, but has made. Which way are we going now?
We're going neither way, because today the United States is at the mercy of two highly aggressive clients that have been able to leverage the U.S. to engage in enterprises that not only go against the American national interest, but threaten to corrupt the political system and bring the U.S. down. And the Romans never did that. The Romans had problems, say, with Armenia as a client, but they never allowed Armenia to take over Roman politics the way American clients, Ukraine and Israel, have been able to do. Furthermore, when Rome went against Dacia, guess how many legions they brought or rotated into Dacia? 16. That's two-thirds of their entire army. And guess what as well? What did the U.S. do after 2001, especially going into Afghanistan and then, of course, in 2003 in Iraq? We did the same thing. We had two-thirds of our, or more, of our deployable military engaged in occupying two medium-sized countries. And then furthermore, guess what again? We lost in both places. We eventually had to withdraw in humiliating circumstances, whether we acknowledged it or not. That is not the Roman way. The Romans essentially laid waste to Dacia and made it bow down. We are not capable of that. And yet, what you see still among neocons in the US, and you can see this in a very powerful article by Robert Kaplan, who is well known in neocon circles. He says, we must do what the Union did in 1864 when it laid waste to the South in Sherman's March to the Sea. We must do what the Allies, meaning the US and Britain, did to Germany when we bombed the crap out of them, and Japan as well. We must do this to Iran. Now, frankly, America does not want and cannot be brought to a point today, especially after 20 years of failed war after 9/11. America cannot be brought to the point where we want to slaughter people the way people are being slaughtered today in the Middle East and Ukraine. And I think this is a bridge too far. And so we're at an inflection point. We're not going to do it. We're not Roman. Thank God. We're not willing to lay waste and destroy whole nations.
Well,
and when we tried, we failed.
Are we going to pay them?
Well, if we're lucky, we'll find a way to end the war in Ukraine and pay what is required to keep Ukraine on life support because the place has been destroyed. And then maybe we'll pay money to Iran and Israel to keep them from a situation of absolute global mayhem. I hope so. But the Romans were smart because, and again, I have to get back to the whole Dacian thing. The king of Dacia was happy getting millions of sesterci as payment from the Romans. And that was a good policy by the Romans. When he stopped, then of course they felt slighted and they had to go in and bring things to an end. But we're not capable of that right now. We're more in the situation of the Byzantine, which is, of course, the Roman imperial state in the east, in the 7th century facing the Avars. And the Constantinople sent tons and tons of gold to the Avars because they weren't in a position to defeat them. And I think the United States has to get a grip right now and understand that we're not merely overextended, we're in a position where we're letting aggressive and irresponsible client kingdoms determine our fate. This is madness.
Germanicus is Michael Vlahos. I am John Batchelor Gaius. We're in Londinium. We're headed to the theater. We don't know whether there's a bill tonight or not. There's another unusual disease going around, and they often close the theater thinking that's going to protect people. It's the same old disease, and it's dangerous, and yet we'll go on to after we sacrifice to the great god Augustus, who is the man responsible for the Roman Empire that we so much celebrate. We spend time in the 21st century without resolution, but then again, that is where we are. We can't see. There's a wall. We can't see past it. All we can look for is analogies to our own time. The might of Rome makes it very simple. That is not any longer the alternative available to the United States. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm John Batchelor.